This is a 1991 Ferrari F40. It is one of the most iconic, unforgettable, special, amazing, thrilling, exhilarating cars in the entire history of the automobile. Or so I've been told. I've never driven one before. Today, that's going to change. This car is listed for sale for $1.3 million by my friends at LBI Limited, a local exotic car dealership here in Philadelphia that always has the coolest stuff in their inventory. In the past, LBI has loaned me a Lamborghini Yalpa, which I filmed a review with last year, a pristine, low-mileage original Acura NSX, and my personal favorite, a Ferrari Challenge race car, which I proceeded to drive on the street. Their website with their amazing inventory is linked in the description below. LBI always has the coolest cars, but this might just be the coolest car. This is a Ferrari F40, one of Ferrari's 5 great supercars, and it is currently listed for sale for $1.3 million. Let me repeat that, $1.3 million. And today I'm going to show you why it is worth every penny. I'm going to take you on an in-depth tour and show you all of its quirks and weird features, and then I'm going to get it out on the road and I'm going to drive the Ferrari F40. And at the end, as usual, I'm going to give it a Doug score. But first, a quick look at what makes this car so significant. Like I said, the F40 is one of the 5 Ferrari supercars, the 5 ultra-special Ferrari models that are even rarer and more collectible and more special than Ferrari's regular models. The other 4 are the 288 GTO, the F50, the Enzo, and the LaFerrari. And of that group, Ferrari built the most F40s, roughly 1,300 total for the world. But many people consider it the best, the most raw and visceral, the meanest. It was built to commemorate Ferrari's 40th anniversary, hence the name, and it's generally considered to be the last car Enzo Ferrari had much of a hand in. A lot of people think Ferrari started to go softer and more luxury focused after the F40. Despite a lot of conjecture and claims otherwise, every F40 was painted red from the factory, and they all came with a 2.9-liter twin-turbo V8 that made somewhere around 500 horsepower. More on that somewhere around in a minute. Right now, on to the quirks and features. We'll start on the outside, and specifically this huge spoiler, an icon. If you want to talk about cars with wings, you start with this one. One interesting thing you may not have known about the spoiler is that the F40 logo is only on one side, the passenger side, so that it can be going forward in the same direction as the car. Another one of this car's most iconic details, its headlights. Now, when you look at the car, when it's just sitting here, you'll notice one set of headlights. You think that's all the headlights? It is not. Twist the headlight knob, and the pop-up headlights come right up. Yes, that's right. There's 2 sets of headlights in this car, and here's the cool thing. When the pop-ups are down and you go to flash the brights, the bottom ones flash. When you put the pop-ups up and you go to flash the brights, the top ones flash. That way, if you want to flash your brights at someone and you don't have your lights on, you don't have to wait for the pop-ups to flip up in order to flash your lights at them. That's smart thinking. Next up, I want to discuss the F40's gas caps. Yes, gas caps. There are 2. One on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. I'll get to why that is in a second. Right now, I want you to just focus on the appearance of the gas cap, and notice also that the gas cap has a little lock on it. There are many locks on the outside of this car. There are, for example, locks in the front on the trunk, one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. There are locks in back on the hood, also one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. Of course, there are locks on the driver and passenger doors, and then there are the aforementioned locks on the fuel tank. In all, there are 8 total locks on the outside of this car, opened by 3 separate keys. And we're not even to the wheel locks yet. Yeah, that's right, the wheel locks. This car doesn't have normal lug nuts like a regular car. Instead, it has center lock wheels. That's kind of common on Porsches and stuff today, but it was not common back then. It was only on race cars. The thing I've always liked about this car's center lock wheels is the little pin in the middle. You get the sense that's the only thing holding these wheels on. Of course, it's not true, but it is a characteristic F40 styling element. Another characteristic F40 design element is back here, this back window, which is not made out of glass or plastic, but Lexan, which is this heat-resistant, crack-resistant material. The most unique design element of this back window are these strakes that give you better visibility from the front seat and aid with the engine's cooling. Something I bet you didn't know, they're open. If you want, you can just walk up to an F40 and stick your hand in and feel the engine, if it fits. Yet another unforgettable design element on the F40 are all these arrow-shaped inlets on the sides, on the top of the trunk, on the top of the hood. Nobody makes these things anymore. Nobody makes arrow-shaped inlets, but the F40 had a zillion of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're kind of strange when you really think about them and when you total them up, but the truth is that without them, it just wouldn't look like an F40.
Speaking of the air intakes, we all knew about the arrow-shaped ones, but I found one today that I never even knew existed on this car. Behind the rear windows, there's a little air intake on either side, inside a little tunnel. Who knew? Here's another thing you may not have known about the F40. The paint in an F40 is incredibly thin, notoriously thin, in fact. Now, supposedly, Ferrari did this for a purpose. More paint would have meant more weight, and so they put thin paint on in order to save weight. Now, the interesting result of this is that since most of this car is made out of this ultra-lightweight carbon Kevlar mix, you can see the weave through the paint. Anywhere you look, you can see through the very thin paint this carbon Kevlar mix, which is really cool, and it has another benefit, too. You can always tell if an F40 has been repainted and the paint is too thick because you can no longer see the weave. Classic car experts use this as a way to define whether an F40 has been repainted or whether it still wears its original paint. Next, we move on to the F40's engine cover. If you ever want to know how to open an F40's engine cover, well, here you go. First, you open these little things once you've unlocked them with the key that I talked about before. Now that they're open, you put your hands here and you be very, very careful because I can only imagine what this piece costs. It's actually heavier than you might expect. Oh. In the end, it's kind of a two-person job, and I'll show you why in a second. All right, this is Adolfo. He runs LBI Limited. He is going to demonstrate the two-person job of opening and propping the engine cover in the Ferrari F40. So it's unlatched right now, and that means lift time. He's going to do the hard thing. Next up, I have to take the prop out. It's in two pieces. It's in two distinct pieces. I put them together. Done. But then I have to get it into the little hole for the hood prop very carefully. And, okay. And that's the Ferrari F40 engine cover, now open and propped. Now, once you're under the hood, there's no major surprise back here. You have the engine, the turbos, etc., except for one thing, and that is just how much is exposed. When you open the hood or the trunk of any normal car, usually there's a lot of bodywork on the sides. Usually you can't see the tires. In the F40, when you open the engine cover, you're basically pulling off half the body of this car. It's an incredible appearance when it's actually open. Now that the engine cover is open and we've seen what's underneath, it is time to close it, which is also a two-person job. First, you have to kind of grab the hood prop so it doesn't fall in. Then you open the hood a little bit. Then you take this thing down, turn it back into two pieces, which is a very confusing process. There we go. Now it's back in two. We slide it back down, put it back in its place. Then comes the really hard part, and that is how to close it, which is with extreme care.
That's because to close it properly, you have to lay down the hood ever so slightly on these upward-facing metal teeth mounted on the bumper, along with another set of metal teeth next to the rear wheels. You have to get it perfectly into position or else you might damage it, and then you close the latches. Another cool thing about the F40's engine cover is that it's not designed for idiots. There's no built-in stopper that prevents you from pushing it all the way up and over so that it lands on top of the F40's roof. That would have added unnecessary weight, so you just don't do it.
Now, since you've seen what's in back, you probably want to see what's under the front cover, and so this is also a two-person job. First, you unlatch it, just like on the other side, and then since this thing flexes a little, you kind of want to lift it up with two people. The interesting part is once it's up, it just keeps going and going, and it's only held on by these two little wires. It's actually kind of nerve-wracking when it's in this position. Now, once the front trunk is open and supported by those little wires, it is absolutely amazing how much of the front of the car is removed. That was true in back, but it's really incredible in front. Allow me to illustrate really quick. Right now, I am standing inside the front wheel of the F40. The front wheel is over there. I am between the two wheels. You pull off an enormous amount of car when you open the front trunk. And you can see the parts that are left behind, which remain structural. It's actually really cool to see the car in this position. It is amazing to take in. Another interesting thing about this particular car with the front trunk open, inside you have the Ferrari factory toolkit, the Ferrari factory tire kit, and the original F40 owner's manual inside the nice leather pouch. Now, the cool thing about the F40 owner's manual is it's only about 50 pages long, and in that 50 pages is the manual in 4 separate languages. There's just not that many electronics. There's not that much stuff you have to learn about. You just kind of get in and drive. Oh, and by the way, this thing on eBay, $500. Add in the leather pouch, $800. Add in all that stuff, probably like $3 grand. This is the most expensive owner's manual toolkit situation you will ever see.
One other trunk detail, it may not look like there's much room there, but Ferrari made custom sets of F40 luggage designed to snugly fit right in place under here.
Moving on to the interior, this car has some very special characteristics on the inside. My personal favorite thing in the entire interior of the car is the door panels. There is no luxury here. There's no niceties. There's no leather-lined hand stitching. Instead, you get a little door pocket, you get a winder for your window, but my personal favorite feature on the door panel is the door handle. There's no nice door handle integrated beautifully into the panel. There's a cord. I'm serious. You pull it, the door opens. You know how modern Porsches have those little cloth hoops right next to their power windows so they can look like they're saving weight? This thing doesn't look like anything. This thing is actually saving weight. Next up, let's talk about the transmission. The Ferrari F40 is a 5-speed manual. That's right, your Ford Focus ST has more forward gears than a Ferrari F40. The other thing you might not have known about the F40 is that it's a dogleg transmission. First is down and to the left where you'd expect second to be. That way, second and third can be in a line, which are the gears you're probably going to be using a lot if you're actually on most racetracks. The problem with that is that reverse is up and to the left where you'd expect first to be. You don't want to make that mistake in any car, but trust me, you really don't want to make that mistake in an F40. The next interesting thing about the F40 is just how basic and bare bones it is inside this car. There's no radio. There's no air conditioning, although there is a climate control system that doesn't really work all that well. There's no power windows, there's no power locks, there's no power mirrors. In this car, there isn't even an interior dome light in order to save weight. I'm serious. So, one benefit of the F40, in this car, you don't have to worry about draining the battery by leaving the doors open all night as it's sitting in your garage. Interestingly, despite all the stuff this car doesn't have, it does have sun visors, and the one on the passenger side even has a mirror on it, because the Italians have their priorities straight. Other interesting interior features of this car, on the left side, there are two stalks coming out of the steering wheel. One is for the headlights, the other is for the turn signals. When you're going to put on the turn signals, you have to make sure you don't hit the headlight stalk. On the right side of the steering column is the windshield wiper stalk, and it has a nifty little feature to it. If you twist it to turn it on, the driver would no longer be able to see the little windshield wiper displays. And so they printed them on the bottom too, so that even when it's twisted on, the windshield wiper stalk is still clearly a windshield wiper stalk. That is smart. Another amazing thing about the interior of this car, it is clearly not designed for comfort. These racing seats, they're made out of carbon fiber and they really hug you. And the carbon Kevlar is everywhere in this thing. There are little tiny floor mats, but other than that, it is just carbon everywhere. A lot of modern cars have carbon fiber touches everywhere to look sporty. In this thing, it's all functional. It takes away from the luxuriousness of this car. They could have covered all that, and instead they were like, nah, keep it. It saves weight, it's functional. People don't need any more than that. And the interior of this car is all basic and all about necessity.
It's so basic that the center isn't even taken up by a screen or even an attempt at luxury. It's 3 gauges: temperature, oil pressure, and fuel. The gauge cluster is really simple. The only notable items are 2 slow-down lights on either side, sort of like check engine lights for each bank of cylinders. And yes, that's a boost gauge over on the right. As for storage, there's no glove box, and the center storage is these 2 pockets. They're not big and they don't close. Good luck. To the left of the steering wheel, there are just 4 buttons: the hazard lights, the front and rear fog lights, and the windshield defogger. Also, you ever want to know how to start an F40? Turn the key and push that rubber button. Who knew?
And then we get to possibly this F40's most hilarious quirk, the Classy K certification. For those of you who don't know what the Classy K certification is, here's the deal. If you have a Ferrari and you want them to verify that it's original as it left the factory, you can take it into the dealer. The technician goes under the car, he verifies that all the serial numbers are original, he takes a few pictures, and then he sends all that off to Italy. A couple months later, a nice little book arrives saying that your car has been Classy K certified. The cost for this certification, right now for the F40, $7,440. Just to have some guy verify some serial numbers. Interestingly, this has become really important in the world of older Ferrari models. People have become obsessed with this Classy K certification, even though it really only means the car was factory original when it was certified. For example, this car has already been Classy K certified. After that, I could have replaced everything you see. You could be looking at a Pontiac Fiero with a Ferrari F40 body, and yet this car would still have its Classy K certification. The really crazy thing about Classy K certification is that Ferrari even offers it on some of its newest models. Right now, if you pay Ferrari $5,640, they will give you a Classy K certificate for your 458 Speciale. In other words, you pay them almost $6,000 and they tell you that a car they made 24 months ago is a car that they made 24 months ago. Short of establishing a government or creating a highly detailed counterfeiting operation, Ferrari Classy UK certification has to be about the closest thing in the entire world to literally printing money. Now, before I move on to the driving experience, one final quirk about this particular F40. This is a Euro F40. Compared to the USA F40 sold in the North American market, there are some substantial differences between the two cars. One of the biggest ones is the appearance. On the front, the lip of the USA cars is a lot more pronounced, larger for USA crash safety regulations. Same with the bumper in the back. In addition, also for US crash safety regulations, the US cars have a third brake light, and they have automatic seatbelts that automatically whir up every time you open the door, just like an 80s Honda Accord. The result is that the Euro car has more of a cleaner look without those additional safety things Ferrari didn't intend to put on. And also, it's lighter. A Euro F40 like this one is 160 pounds lighter than a USA car. Now, that might make you think that a Euro one is the one to get, but the USA car had one distinct benefit. In the USA cars, to make up for the additional weight, Ferrari added power. US cars supposedly make 500 to 515 horsepower, whereas a Euro F40 makes 478 horsepower. The other big difference between the Euro F40 and the USA F40 was the fuel situation. Now, I mentioned those two fuel tanks on either side. Well, they feed two fuel bladders located inside the car, and on the Euro cars, those fuel bladders had to be changed every 7 to 10 years at a cost of $13,000. This car just had its $13,000 bladders changed. Now, the interesting thing is the US cars, by EPA regulations, couldn't have the bladders. Instead, they had aluminum fuel tanks. There were some drawbacks to the aluminum fuel tanks. For example, they could be corrosive under the wrong circumstances. They don't provide as much safety in a high-speed accident with fire risk, and they weighed a little bit more. But the benefit of the aluminum fuel tanks, of course, is they don't need to be changed out every 7 to 10 years.
Okay, so that's a fairly comprehensive tour of the quirks and features and the ins and outs of the Ferrari F40. Now it's time to get this thing out on the road.
Also, while I'm reviewing the F40 in this video, if you want to know more of my thoughts, my fears, my worries, my hopes and expectations about driving the F40 for the first time, a $1.3 million car, click the link below to go to autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've written a story that goes into greater detail about all of that stuff. Jesus. My God. Okay, we're driving the F40 in sort of a city setting here. All right, so the ride is a little bit rough as expected. You're just so low in the car. I am so low down to the ground. The clutch situation is just crazy. The pedal box is also really narrow. You have to be careful of every little bump in the road. The car is actually not that low. The approach angle is very hard. The front sticks out quite a bit. It is crazy to look back there and see the rear window that you've seen in pictures for 20 years, basically. It's just amazing how close you are to the front of the car and how low you are, even more so than in every other exotic car I drive, 488 and all that stuff. You're so much lower. Oh my God, this Ultima looks like a monster truck. It gets really hot inside this cabin. It's actually really kind of impressive. I've got the climate control going, but the thing is, it doesn't do much because there's only 3 vents and they don't really, we have it on the highest setting and they're not really doing a lot. Going around a corner here, it's a little bit of a bumpy one. The ride quality is rough. That's just a reality of this car, but the handling is so great. It's just so incredible because it's really like a go-kart. You can position it anywhere and do anything with it, and it's amazing. We're on 95 south in an F40. This is about the craziest experience I've ever had. Oh my God, I just looked in the mirror for the first time. It's incredible to see all that stuff back there. The wing and everything, that's amazing. You're watching a childhood dream come true right now. Man, the bumps, yeah, they kind of attack you on the highway here. It feels very stable though, surprisingly so. It doesn't feel like it's about to get out of whack or do anything stupid. It feels like we're planted on the ground and it feels good. This car has the factory exhaust on it and there's just not all that much noise with it, unfortunately. Aftermarket exhausts really bring the noise out of this car a lot more. The factory original exhaust, it just wasn't that loud. I'm surprised how planted it feels. It actually feels like a modern sports car in that sense. It feels very stable on the road. I thought I'd be scared as hell driving this thing and it'd be squirrely and weird, and actually it doesn't. It feels pretty good. Easy downshift. Honestly, the transmission and stuff feels pretty slick. It feels good. It's kind of nice to operate. I actually think that the whole thing feels less rigid and the clutch is easier than in a Testarossa. It feels almost more like a car you can sort of play around with and have fun with. I'm stunned by that. And I'm behind a Sentra, he's braking. I have no idea why because I can't see around him. Oh, there's a big truck. That's about the scariest thing. This car is worth more than every car I can see. I have to say though, I was thinking this whole time that I'd be so nervous about the value, but it's actually such an easy car to drive at this speed. I'm not really thinking about it that much. It is easier though than I thought to drive. The clutch isn't as hard, the gas pedals is easier to push, the ride quality is not so bad. The visibility is excellent because there's no weird crash stuff all around you. You can see in every direction. I really wonder if we're the only people in this country driving one of these right now, certainly the only people in this state. Wow, you can just, it just is kind of like a bullet. You can just point it. It's so much more tossable than modern cars, so much more, because the steering is just so direct and it feels little and precise and you can actually put it where you want to put it. I'm just blown away by that. There's a Woody Ford Flex. I don't know what's rarer, but I hope that is. It is so stable on the road. It just, I really feel like I could be doing this in a rainstorm if I wanted. It also is surprising there's very little rattling and stuff. Ultimately, this car's 25 years old. I would think that it'd be rattling and feeling like it's gonna break down. Not really. This car has obviously been tremendously well kept and well maintained. It's surprising how quickly it can move and how quickly it can change direction. I'm really surprised. This car actually still feels like an amazing car all this time later. The thing I was most nervous about driving this car was that over the highway expansion joints, it's got this old steering rack. It would kind of send me in a weird way. It doesn't. It is planted. It is stable. I love hearing the turbos in a Ferrari. It's amazing. I love that turbo sound. How cool. I wish there was more climate control. This isn't a car you want to drive in 95-degree temperatures. Another interesting thing, the louvers in the back let you see out the back, but there are no louvers directly down the middle. So what's directly behind you is actually kind of obscured like a mini Clubman with that thing in the middle. Here goes. Oh my God, it's so fast. It really is. And the turbo does come on in the old school way. You're going fast, and then you're going really fast. I'm just amazed at how planted it feels on the road. The car inspires a lot of confidence. It doesn't feel like it's pulling, it's not jiggling around, it's not beating you up at the ride. It doesn't feel like the steering is loose. All right, tunnel time. You just have to. Nothing, bam! The turbo lag situation is exactly as everybody's ever described it. Really not much happens for a while and then a lot happens. It really kind of blows up. This car, for an 80s car, is the most planted, capable, stable 80s car I've ever driven. I love the handling, it's just great. I just love how connected it is. So many modern cars have just lost all that. There's just so much less connection. I wish it were a little more precise, but that was just how it was back then. I never thought I'd be like, zoink, zoink, with an F40. I thought I'd be like, oh God, what's gonna happen? But I actually feel pretty confident in this car. It's very confidence inspiring. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that's the Ferrari F40, one of the most iconic cars from possibly the most iconic brand in the entire history of the automobile. Expensive to buy? Yes. Expensive to own? Yes. Worth every penny? Absolutely. And now it's time for the Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, that one's easy. The F40 gets a 10, no explanation needed. Next up is acceleration. The F40 does 0 to 60 in a turbo-laggy 3.7 seconds. It earns an 8 out of 10. Next is handling, which is impressive, but there's a little slowness in the steering you don't get in the very best modern cars. It hardly matters as it earns a 9 out of 10. Next up is cool factor. Few cars in world history have ever been as cool, and it gets an easy 10 out of 10. Finally, there's importance. This car is significant to Ferrari as one of its 5 great supercars, to the car industry as it's supposedly the first car to ever hit 200 miles an hour, and to any child who ever had one as a poster on a bedroom wall, which is many of us. It gets an easy 10 out of 10, bringing its total weekend score to an amazing 47 out of 50. By far the best yet, a full 5 points ahead of the Porsche 911R. Future cars, good luck beating the F40. Things take a different turn when we move on to the daily score. Features and equipment? It has none. It has a cord for an interior door handle. It doesn't have a dome light. It gets and deserves the very first 1 out of 10 in this category. Luxury measures comfort, and this car isn't comfortable. The seats are tight, the climate control is non-existent, and the ride is harsh, but not quite as harsh as I was expecting, so it gets a 2 out of 10 rather than a 1. Quality measures materials and reliability. The F40 uses fine materials, but they don't really measure up by modern standards. More importantly, reliability is rough. These cars are notoriously expensive to maintain. You ever had to fork over 13 grand to change the fuel bladder in your Acura? It gets a 4 out of 10. Practicality is next, and the F40 has laughable cargo space, passenger room, and gas mileage. It gets a 1 out of 10. And finally, there's value, which is almost impossibly hard. How do you score a car that costs over $1 million? It's impossible to pick an objectively agreeable number here, but here's what I know. The F40 has always been valuable. It will always be valuable. It may be expensive, but it might look cheap in 10 years when they're selling for $2 million. That should earn it a high score, but it's knocked down by the fact that one could argue we're in a bit of an exotic car bubble, and prices could drop before they inevitably rise again. So it gets a 7 out of 10. And that brings the final daily score to an almost laughable 15 out of 50. Don't buy this thing to drive every day. Add those together and the final Doug score is 62 out of 100, which is in the middle of the pack. That makes sense. It's virtually impossible to drive this car every day, but it's amazing to drive it occasionally. And if you look more at the weekend and the daily scores separately, which is what I do, rather than the two combined, you get a great idea of exactly what kind of car the F40 is.